In the year 594 of the Saint calendar, 13-year-old Louis Kirill arrives at Kandria Arcanist Academy to take the entrance exam, and the moment he stands in front of the massive gate, he's completely stunned by the endless crowd of applicants trying to get into the Empire's most prestigious magic school. A few moments later, his foster parents come rushing toward him completely out of breath because Louis got their way too fast. But even while exhausted, his foster mother Lucilla, a kind nun, still nervously checks if he brought his ID and dyed his hair properly, so he won't attract attention. Louis calmly tells her not to worry because he came fully prepared, but Lucilla still can't hide her fear since people have always treated Louis differently because of his unusual hair color, and she's terrified the other students might look down on him. Julian, Louis's foster father, quickly reassures her, saying magic is the only path that can truly change Louis's future, especially since Kandria Academy is the only place in the Northern Empire where even commoners are allowed to take the exam. This academy was founded by the Kandria royal family, stands among the 10 great academies, and is famous for producing some of the Empire's strongest guardians under the guidance of a legendary grandmaster. In recent years, even several powerful graduates from humble backgrounds came from this place, which is exactly why Julian believes it's the perfect environment for Louis to grow stronger. Hearing that, Louis firmly declares that he will become the next Grand Master, so he can gain enough power to reclaim ownership of the orphanage from the church and protect the family that raised him. His determination instantly makes Lucilla emotional, and through tears, she says he's become such a dependable young man. But she also blames herself for being unable to cure the dangerous rampages he suffers from while still forcing him to worry about the orphanage's future. Julian immediately shuts that down, reminding her that she spent years saving abandoned children and giving them a home, and even Louis agrees because, to him, Lucilla is the reason he's alive at all. In his previous life, Louis dreamed of becoming the world's greatest fighter, but his severe asthma forced him to live attached to a respirator, and over time, even his own parents began treating him like a burden because of the constant medical costs. Still, despite his weak body, he never abandoned martial arts and eventually became a respected scholar researching combat theory. His work helped revive martial arts across the world, but everything fell apart when another scholar stole his thesis and framed Louis as the thief, mocking him as someone too sick to deserve recognition. In the end, even his parents abandoned him completely after his mother became pregnant again, leaving Louis with only one final wish before death. If he ever got another life, he wanted a healthy body and a family that truly loved him. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in the arms of Lucilla, who discovered him abandoned on the streets. Even though people warned her that his strange hair color could bring disaster, she ignored every warning and chose to raise him anyway, giving him the name Louis Kirill. And just like that, Louis finally gained the two things he wanted most, a healthy body and a real family. Back in the present, the peaceful moment suddenly gets ruined when a noble intentionally shoves Lucilla to the ground after hearing Louis boldly claim he'll become a Grand Master someday. Louis instantly burns with anger after seeing his mother humiliated, but before he can react, Julian stops him and reminds him to focus on the exam instead of starting trouble. Lucilla also gently reminds Louis about the promise he made not to cause problems at the academy, so he forces himself to calm down and apologizes to her immediately. The noble brats clearly aren't satisfied, but they eventually leave to collect their exam numbers. Right after that, the crowd suddenly erupts with excitement as another noble arrives, Kane Aranka, the talented heir of the prestigious Aranka family. And the way everyone praises him like some untouchable genius only makes Louis clench his fists harder because now he's more determined than ever to prove who the real strongest truly is. Lucilla looks worried after seeing Louis react so strongly earlier, but Louis quickly reassures her that he's completely fine before confidently declaring once again that he'll become a Grand Master someday. His bold statement instantly catches Kane Aranka's attention, making the noble heir glance back at him, while the same spoiled nobles from before burst out laughing like Louis just told the biggest joke in the world. But Louis doesn't care at all. Instead, he heads toward the academy with a huge grin, silently promising himself that he'll become the strongest so he can protect the precious family that finally gave him a real home. As he runs off, Lucilla can't stop worrying because only 20 or 30 students pass the exam each year, Yet this time, there are over 20,000 applicants competing for those spots. Still, in the end, all she truly wants is for Louis to stay safe. Julian, however, understands Louis better than anyone and says that once Louis decides on something, he charges straight ahead no matter what anyone says, and as his family, their role is simply to support him all the way. Meanwhile, Louis arrives at the massive examination hall and immediately notices that almost every applicant there is much older than him. Before anyone can say anything else, the academy principal, Aronian Smith, suddenly flies down from the sky, instantly stunning the crowd with his overwhelming presence. The students are shocked because the principal himself is a Grand Master, one of the Empire's elite powerhouses. In this world, martial arcanists are divided into 6 major ranks, and reaching Grand Master means standing among the privileged monsters at the top of society. After introducing himself, Aronian announces the first exam. The challenge is simple on paper. Climb the massive staircase guarded by senior students and obtain one of the exam passes placed behind them. Only 1,000 applicants can move on to the next stage, and once the passes are gone, the test immediately ends. The moment the exam begins, countless applicants rush toward the stairs, confidently mocking the test for being too easy. But the instant they start climbing, one of the seniors welcomes them to hell and unleashes an overwhelming aura that instantly knocks many students unconscious without anyone even touching them. The remaining applicants are completely confused, wondering how people are dropping left and right without being attacked. But Louis instantly realizes what's happening. Calmly walking forward, he explains that this isn't a physical attack at all. It's pure killing intent released through aura to crush weak minds with fear alone. Hearing this, the senior student named Sheath confirms Louis is correct and even compliments him for having guts, though his tone clearly shows his disgust toward commoners. That arrogance immediately irritates Louis, and Sheath, who already despises commoners, decides to force Louis onto his knees by releasing even more terrifying killing intent. The pressure becomes so intense that more students collapse instantly, but somehow Louis remains standing completely unfazed. Then he casually mocks Sheath, asking if that's really the best he can do, before confidently saying that while this level of killing intent might terrify ordinary people, it means nothing to someone who has already pushed himself to death countless times. With that, Louis starts climbing the stairs effortlessly while Sheath keeps increasing the pressure with everything he has. Yet Louis's determination never breaks for even a second. Then suddenly, Louis releases his own terrifying killing intent while rushing directly towards Sheath, and the atmosphere instantly freezes as everyone watching gets overwhelmed by the sheer pressure coming from a kid who hasn't even used magic yet. At the very last moment, Louis stops himself before things go too far, leaving the applicants completely stunned by what they just witnessed. He calmly walks past Sheath and grabs an exam pass, but the humiliated senior immediately loses his temper and rushes at Louis from behind. Even then, Louis casually blocks the attack without using magic at all. Before the situation can spiral further, Principal Aronian steps in and orders Sheath to stand down because Louis has officially passed the first exam. Sheath bitterly complains about Louis being a commoner, but the principal immediately shuts him down, declaring that Candria Arcanist Academy treats nobles and commoners equally because in front of monsters, they are all simply human. Hearing that, Sheath reluctantly backs off while Louis respectfully thanks the principal for being fair, but just as things settle down, Aronian suddenly stares at Louis's unusual hair color and quietly remarks that it may become a serious concern. The principal suddenly stares directly into Louis's eyes and quietly asks if his eyes are unusual too, but Louis immediately acts confused like he has no idea what he's talking about. Aronian then places a hand on Louis's shoulder and whispers that if Louis admits the truth, he can personally prepare a special magic potion to hide his unique traits. That instantly makes Louis cautious because the principal clearly knows more than he should, but right now surviving the entrance exam matters more than anything else, so Louis politely avoids the conversation and leaves to prepare for the second test. As he walks away, he passes by Sheath, who looks furious because this was the first time the principal ever stepped in during an exam, and the person he protected was a commoner of all people. Soon, The 1,000 applicants who passed the first stage gather at the academy's second training ground, while the professors tell everyone to wait for further instructions. Standing there quietly, Lewis notices almost every examinee around him is a noble, but even while minding his own business, the same bully nobles from earlier approach him again with disgusting looks on their faces, warning him that nobody will save him next time. One of them even claims Lewis would have been disqualified long ago if the principal hadn't interfered, but instead of getting angry, Lewis just smirks and says a grandmaster clearly has better judgment than a bunch of idiots. The noble instantly realizes he's being mocked and swings at Lewis in anger, but before anyone can react, Lewis calmly strikes the guy's shoulder with 2 fingers, instantly making his arm stop moving properly. Then Lewis follows up with another martial arts technique that sends the bully stumbling backward across the ground, leaving everyone nearby completely stunned. The bully's friends rush over to help him while the injured noble panics after realizing he can barely move his arm, immediately accusing Lewis of using poison and threatening to report him to the administrators. Lewis casually explains that it's not poison at all, it's martial arts, and admits he's been holding himself back because his mother told him not to cause trouble, but honestly, his patience is starting to hit its limit. Furious at the constant harassment, Lewis is about to teach them another lesson when Kane suddenly steps in and tells him that fighting during the exam could get him disqualified. Hearing that, Lewis quietly backs away while one of the noble bullies angrily tells Kane not to interfere in their business. Kane responds with a cold glare and asks if they even know who they're talking to, instantly forcing them to back off. Even though the nobles leave while gritting their teeth in frustration, their leader secretly thinks both nobles and commoners are equally worthless. Meanwhile, Lewis watches Kane from a distance and assumes he's just another noble, using his status however he wants, convincing himself that all nobles are the same. But then Kane walks over and compliments Lewis for being both strong and fearless before suggesting they team up together. The second the nearby students overhear that Kane is looking for teammates, they swarm around him immediately, desperate to join forces with the heir of the prestigious sage Aranka family. Lewis, however, has zero interest in noble politics or alliances, so he simply stays silent. Right then, Principal Aronian appears on stage and congratulates everyone for surviving the willpower test before announcing that the second exam will measure their strength. With a single snap of his fingers, glowing patterns suddenly appear on every examinee's chest, and moments later, an overwhelming weight crashes down onto all of them, making most students struggle just to stay standing. The principal calmly explains that under the effects of his earth magic, they must now reach the stage ahead of them. The students instantly realize they're being forced to move while carrying terrifying pressure from a grandmaster-level spell, and panic spreads everywhere as most of them can barely take a step. But in the middle of all that chaos, Lewis casually walks forward like nothing is even affecting him. Even Kane, who received elite training for years, is shocked while struggling to move under the pressure himself. Lewis reaches the stage first without breaking a sweat, causing the principal to smile as he announces that Lewis has once again become the first examinee to pass the test. The crowd can't believe a commoner managed to outperform every noble twice in a row, especially under pressure strong enough to overwhelm even Kane. After that, the principal deactivates the earth magic and declares that everyone still standing will advance to the next stage. Then countless weapons appear across the arena, and the examinees are told to choose whatever weapon suits them best. Lewis grabs a sword and swings it around effortlessly while many other students struggle just to lift theirs properly. The principal then explains the rules. Anyone who falls outside the stage will be disqualified. Once everyone is ready, he officially starts the exam and orders the professors to release the bound slimes before disappearing instantly, leaving the students completely confused. Most examinees have no idea what bound slimes even are, but Lewis immediately looks toward the sky because he already knows these creatures usually attack from above. Seconds later, small slimes suddenly rain down onto the arena, and despite looking tiny and harmless, they quickly put everyone on edge. The principal's voice echoes through the area as he explains the scoring system. Blocking a slime attack earns 1 point, dodging earns 2, and defeating a slime gives 5 points. Only the top 100 students will move on to the third exam. Hearing this, many examinees start mocking the slimes for looking weak and goofy, convinced the test will be easy. One student confidently rushes forward hoping for an easy 5 points, but the slime immediately launches itself at him and the battle begins across the entire arena. From above, the principal and the professors quietly observe the chaos while recording everyone's performance. One green-haired professor mentions the talented heirs from the sage families, including the Aranka and Durahan houses, wondering if they'll break new records, while another professor points out the promising commoners, especially Lewis. Hearing that name again, Aronian smiles slightly and says Lewis is a very interesting boy who may end up showing them something truly fascinating. But moments later, one professor notices that Lewis hasn't moved at all since the test started. Meanwhile, while everyone else desperately struggles against the slimes and slowly exhausts themselves, Lewis simply stands there calmly watching everything unfold, causing the other examinees to mock him and say the slimes are obviously too much for a commoner like him to handle after all. One of the slimes suddenly launches itself straight at Lewis, but with a tiny tilt of his head, he dodges so smoothly that the slime flies right past him and crashes into another examinee instead. The students watching are completely stunned because they were sure Lewis was about to get smacked. But before they can even process what happened, another slime rushes forward and knocks down yet another student. Then things get even crazier when 3 slimes charge directly toward Lewis at the same time, making the bully nobles grin confidently because they think there's no way he can dodge all 3. But at that moment, the story flashes back to Lewis's childhood in his hometown, where he drags his confused friends deep into the mountains and asks them to throw rocks at him. His friends hesitate because it sounds insanely dangerous, but after Lewis keeps insisting, they finally start hurling stones at full speed while Lewis calmly watches every movement with intense focus. Back in his previous life, Lewis developed a theory that if he could rapidly transfer information from the brain's parietal lobe to the cerebellum and instantly process attack trajectories, then he should theoretically be able to react to almost anything. To test that theory, he trained himself by calculating the speed, angle, and movement of incoming objects in real time, allowing him to evade every single rock with perfect precision. His friends were absolutely blown away after seeing him avoid everything so effortlessly and immediately asked if he had invented some kind of new martial arts technique. Lewis proudly named it Void Combat Calculation. Back in the present, with the 3 slimes rushing toward him, Lewis calmly activates that same technique, instantly predicting the creature's rebound angles, movement patterns, and attack trajectories. To everyone watching, it looks like he's casually walking through chaos while the slimes completely miss him over and over again. Just like that, Lewis gains 8 points from dodging before immediately following up with a sword technique that wipes out the slimes with ease, finally making Kane pay serious attention to him. Even the professors watching from above are shocked because Lewis isn't just reacting randomly. He's accurately reading the slime's movements like a veteran fighter. Some of them even admit his perception rivals experienced combat specialists. Kane watches Lewis with a huge grin, clearly becoming more interested in him by the second. Another slime suddenly targets Lewis, and just as Lewis prepares to finish it off, Kane jumps in and steals the kill right in front of him, instantly making Lewis glare at him in annoyance. Kane laughs shamelessly and openly admits he did it on purpose before clarifying that unlike the bully nobles, he's not trying to mock Lewis. He then properly introduces himself and asks Lewis if he wants to start stealing points together. Lewis still looks suspicious and clearly doesn't trust him yet, but Kane assures him that he simply wants to place high in the rankings, and while they're at it, he wants to compete against Lewis fairly to see who can earn the most points. More than anything, Kane wants to see Lewis fight seriously. Since Kane seems genuinely confident in his abilities, Lewis finally agrees and confidently says they should make things interesting by adding stakes to the competition. He declares that whoever loses must obey one demand from the winner. Kane immediately accepts with a smile, commenting that Lewis is the first person bold enough to make demands of him. Meanwhile, the bully nobles secretly decide to follow Sheath's orders and take both Lewis and Kane down while the battlefield is still chaotic. Moments later, a slime suddenly rushes toward Lewis and Kane, and the nobles use that distraction to launch a sneak attack from behind. Lewis instantly takes care of the slime, but at the same time, 3 arrows come flying toward them at deadly speed. Kane quickly turns toward Lewis, expecting him to get hit, while the bully nobles grin in satisfaction. But the next second, everyone freezes because Lewis casually catches the arrows with his bare hands like it's nothing. The bully nobles are completely horrified after seeing that insane reaction speed. Kane immediately asks if Lewis is all right, while angrily calling out the nobles for fighting dirty. Hearing that only makes the brown-haired bully even more furious, so he launches another attack using a double arrow spell. Kane calmly destroys 2 incoming arrows with his weapon, but then everyone realizes there's still one last arrow flying straight toward him. The final arrow is flying straight toward Kane, but right before impact, Lewis grabs it with his bare hand and saves him at the last second. Kane immediately looks shocked and asks if Lewis's hand is all right, but Lewis brushes it off and calmly says the attackers were aiming for him the whole time, not Kane. Up above, the professors watching the match instantly realize those nobles attacked with obvious malicious intent, so they ask the principal if the students should be disqualified immediately. But Aronian calmly refuses, saying those fools will lose on their own if they keep acting recklessly, though he still orders the professors to prepare healing potions and promises that punishment will come after the exam ends. Back on the battlefield, Lewis suddenly asks Kane if he has ever heard of baseball, completely confusing him for a second. Then Lewis demonstrates by smacking a slime with his sword like a bat, launching the creature straight toward the brown-haired bully. The slime crashes into him so hard that he gets blasted outside the training ground and instantly disqualified. Kane bursts out laughing and comments that this commoner game is actually pretty interesting. After taking down one enemy, Lewis immediately dashes off to handle the others. The remaining nobles panic after seeing their friend eliminated and quickly turn toward where Lewis was standing, only to realize he's already disappeared. Then suddenly, Lewis drops in from above and sends another slime flying toward them, instantly knocking the second noble out of bounds as well. Now only one bully remains, and when Lewis suddenly appears behind him, the guy completely freezes in fear while desperately trying to threaten Lewis by bringing up powerful seniors. He slowly backs away to create distance, but right at that moment Kane casually sticks his foot behind him, causing the noble to trip, fall out of bounds, and get disqualified too. With all 3 bullies gone, Kane thanks Lewis for saving him earlier and checks on his injured hand again. Lewis confirms he's fine before admitting Kane is surprisingly decent for a noble. As they continue fighting together, Kane explains that Lewis shouldn't lump him together with ordinary nobles because he belongs to the prestigious Aranka family, one of the great families. These clans produced multiple Grand Masters and sages over the years, giving them influence powerful enough to rival even the royal family and the Arcanist Association itself. Hearing that, Lewis realizes not every noble is exactly the same, though he keeps focusing on defeating slimes alongside Kane. Unfortunately, the other nobles watching this unfold are furious seeing a commoner like Lewis dominating the battlefield, so many of them suddenly team up and charge toward him together. The moment Kane notices this, his own followers rush in to defend him with everything they have, instantly turning the exam into total chaos. Lewis and Kane both tense up as the battlefield explodes into a giant free-for-all fight. Seeing the perfect opportunity, a red-haired girl decides to jump into the action too and drags Miliana along with her, determined to crush every noble who ever looked down on them. Meanwhile, Lewis is constantly dodging slime attacks while also avoiding spells and attacks from students targeting him from every direction. Realizing things are getting way too messy, Lewis decides to intentionally lower his score to avoid attracting even more trouble later. At the same time, Miliana begins defeating nobles left and right while the red-haired girl tears through opponents beside her. Then another red-haired student enters the chaos carrying a giant hammer, laughing loudly as he declares beating up people is way more fun than fighting monsters. He immediately starts swinging his massive hammer around like a maniac, smashing opponents out of bounds and disqualifying them one after another. Up above, one professor nervously asks the principal if they should stop the madness before things go too far, especially since so many nobles are getting eliminated. But Aronian calmly says the academy follows its own rules and doesn't care about public opinion or noble status. Eventually, after enough examinees are disqualified, the principal descends onto the battlefield and officially announces the end of the second exam. He explains that the rankings and scores of the successful students will be announced shortly before removing the earth magic affecting the area. Afterward, the senior students begin handing out healing potions to the injured examinees. Lewis drinks one as well, and the injury on his hand heals almost instantly, leaving him genuinely shocked by how effective the potion is, though he immediately starts worrying about how insanely expensive something like this must be. Kane walks over and notices Lewis spacing out, then jokingly reassures him that even if he wins their competition, he won't bully him or anything. Lewis can't help smiling after hearing that. Soon after, Principal Aronian begins announcing the second exam rankings. At first, only ranks up to 6th place are shown, making the nobles smirk confidently because no commoners appear on the list at all. But then the principal reveals that the top 5 examinees all surpassed previous academy records, instantly shocking everyone. He begins announcing the rankings one by one. 5th place goes to Miliana Royce, 4th place to Kane Aranka, and 3rd place to Faye Durahan. Hearing this, Kane suddenly becomes nervous because Lewis's name still hasn't been called, making him wonder if Lewis somehow got disqualified for attacking those nobles earlier. The principal finally announces the 2nd place, and the moment Lewis's name is called with an insane total of 887 points, the entire arena goes dead silent. Even Kane freezes in shock, because it finally clicks for him that Lewis wasn't just strong, he actually placed 2nd, while the surrounding nobles are completely shaken, unable to believe a commoner is sitting above even the prestigious noble candidates. Kane quickly realizes what's going on but doesn't push Lewis for answers, instead casually asking what Lewis wants from him, and Lewis simply says he'll talk about it after the exam. Then the biggest shock drops as the principal announces 1st place, Neil Gunn, with an unprecedented 888 points, barely edging out 2nd place, and Neil himself just smirks and says there are some interesting people here, so he expects them not to disappoint. The nobles are completely losing it at this point, because both top spots are taken by commoners from an orphanage, even placing above Faye Durahan, which leaves Faye visibly irritated and itching for a real fight. Meanwhile, Sheath clicks his tongue in frustration, calling these results a disgrace to nobility, while a green-haired teacher points out how this is unprecedented in the Academy's history, with both top ranks coming from orphanage backgrounds. The principal calmly responds that the Arcanist Association runs orphanages because true strength has never been about social status, then orders all successful examinees to proceed to the next venue. As everyone moves out, Kane asks Lewis if he is actually stronger than Neil, but Lewis gives no clear answer, keeping things uncertain. They arrive at the 3rd training ground, where the final exam is revealed, a survival test called Emblem Battle Royale. Each student is given an emblem, then instantly teleported into a forest, where they must collect as many emblems as possible by any means necessary, and anyone who loses theirs is immediately disqualified, with only the top 10 advancing for admission. Kane tells Lewis they should split up for now since the other nobles will definitely target him, and warns him to be careful. While Lewis already understands this is exactly what the principal wanted by revealing the rankings earlier to spark chaos. The principal then coldly tells them to show everything they've got and survive until the end, and the moment teleportation activates, Lewis finds himself alone in the forest, determined to win no matter what it takes. But that calm doesn't last long, because soon he is surrounded by nobles who still haven't forgiven him for humiliating them earlier, confident that without Kane he is easy prey. Lewis quickly notices he is completely encircled by 3 close-range attackers, while another noble hides in a tree preparing a long-range strike, and he instantly realizes his location was leaked through the teleportation system. Attacks come in fast, but Lewis slips through them with precise dodges, even mid-air sensing a sudden magical arrow and countering it before landing, unsure of what exactly just hit him. The fight turns into constant close combat as Lewis blocks and counters repeated attacks, while the hidden long-range attacker keeps firing wind arrows that he narrowly avoids, frustrating the group more and more. Even Lewis starts to feel the pressure, realizing he can't fully calculate magic trajectories yet, so he switches tactics and activates Sun No Sun, aiming to counter before the enemy even completes their strike, turning their own momentum against them. When the nobles rush him all at once, Lewis cleanly reverses their attacks and takes down every close-range opponent in one sequence, securing 3 emblems in the process. But the brown-haired noble desperately orders a final full-power attack, only to realize too late that the long-range attacker has already been eliminated by Kane. Panic spreads as Kane appears, having already wiped out their backup and extracted their entire plan, leaving the brown-haired noble trembling in fear. Kane casually confirms he handled them and mocks their weak coordination, while the noble tries to fight back in desperation, only for Kane to smack him down with his own bow, instantly silencing him. Kane then lands beside Lewis and hands him an emblem, calmly saying these low-level nobles who barely learn magic are no threat to him. He then asks Lewis if he wants help, warning that things will only get more troublesome if this continues. But Lewis immediately refuses, insisting he will handle everything himself. Just as that tension settles, a new presence appears, clapping slowly, saying this is exactly what she expected from the man she acknowledged. The mysterious girl finally reveals herself as Faye, a member of one of the great noble families, and without wasting time, she straight-up challenges Lewis to a one-on-one match. Kane immediately recognizes her and explains that she's actually the Grand Master's daughter, which slightly surprises Lewis. Lewis casually asks if Kane is friends with her, but Kane instantly denies it in frustration, calling her a muscle-brained troublemaker, though he admits he has fought her before and lost. Before things can continue, Faye cuts in annoyed, telling them to stop their little chatter and just answer whether Lewis is going to fight or not. Kane quickly tries to de-escalate, warning Lewis that Faye is skilled in magic and already at apprentice level, so it's smarter to ignore her and focus on collecting emblems instead. But that only fires Faye up more, and she mocks them both as cowards who run away the moment they can't win. Kane gets visibly irritated, but unexpectedly, Lewis agrees with her, saying he has actually been wanting to see how fighters from great families operate anyway. That instantly changes the atmosphere as Faye takes stance, declaring she'll fight without magic to keep things fair, and charges straight at Lewis. Instead of dodging, Lewis takes the hit head-on and immediately grabs her spear mid-strike, locking them into a brutal clash. Faye responds by stomping her weapon, triggering a hidden mechanism that extends and shifts the spear into another form, turning the fight even more intense. She goes fully offensive, unleashing her family technique while Lewis smoothly evades every strike like he's reading her movements in real time. From above, the professors watch in shock, commenting that it's been a long time since they've seen the Durahan family spear style in action, praising Faye's flawless speed and power as expected from a genius. One professor even asks what the others think about Lewis, but another immediately shuts it down, insisting a commoner and a great family heir are simply on different levels, confidently predicting Lewis's defeat. Even the principal is asked for an opinion, and he also leans toward Faye winning. Back on the field, Faye increases her pressure with Sacred Lance Rush, but Lewis continues slipping through every attack, frustrating her more and more. Finally spotting an opening, Lewis rushes in to close the distance, but Faye reacts instantly and counters mid-movement, forcing him to jump back just to avoid a clean hit. She even compliments him for dodging everything so far, admitting even Kane couldn't handle her like this. Lewis calmly replies that as long as you observe properly, dodging is not that difficult. Then Faye shifts gears and activates a spear-based magic technique, unleashing Crescent Fall, a terrifying multi-pattern assault. Lewis instantly analyzes it, breaking it down into thrusts, sweeps, defense, and suppression patterns, realizing the combination is deadly at long range but still readable. Even so, he manages to evade everything. Noticing the key weakness of the technique is its close-range vulnerability, meaning if he times it right and closes in, he can turn the fight around instantly. But Faye reads his intention immediately and counters his approach perfectly, forcing him back while bragging that her technique has no weaknesses. She then begins circling the battlefield, her movement twisting like a spinning tornado of pressure, leaving even the professors stunned as they declare her dominance absolute. Still, Lewis doesn't panic and uses a sword net technique to block and redirect her attacks, thinking through another weakness, high stamina consumption, meaning if he survives long enough, an opening will eventually appear. But the constant clashes start damaging his weapon, and cracks begin forming in his sword. Faye suddenly stops and resets distance, and Lewis instantly spots another opening and charges forward, But at that exact moment, his sword completely shatters mid-strike due to accumulated damage. Even Faye acknowledges his insane adaptation, saying it's obvious he was planning a counterattack if his weapon hadn't broken, and Lewis calmly admits she's right, but luck didn't favor him this time. Then Faye points at him and asks why he was holding back earlier. Lewis apologizes, saying it's just a habit to observe first before going all out, but now he confirms he will get serious. Faye glances at his broken weapon and questions how he plans to continue, but Lewis simply says he is better with his fists anyway. He drops into stance, and Faye instantly realizes there are no openings in his posture anymore, signaling the real fight has just begun. She immediately launches her spinning spear technique again, and Kane tenses up, worried Lewis is at a disadvantage against a full-force charge. But in the next instant, Lewis shocks everyone by stepping in and grabbing Faye's spear with both hands mid-attack, completely stopping her momentum and leaving even Faye stunned by what she's just felt. The professors and even the principal are left stunned as Lewis manages to break straight through Faye's penetrating spear rotation, something no one expected a commoner to handle. But Faye is far from done. She kicks her spear upward, flips it mid-air, and catches it again in a seamless motion before re-entering the fight. Then she pulls back and begins circling at high speed, creating multiple afterimages while launching continuous attacks from every angle, turning the battlefield into a blur of pressure and motion. Yet even this isn't enough to break Lewis's defense, as he calmly reads and counters every strike without panic. The principal narrows his eyes, noticing something unusual. Lewis isn't just blocking, he's actually neutralizing the spear's rotation using a strange technique. Even he looks genuinely impressed, admitting it's the first time he has seen something like this. The professors are equally shocked, unable to believe a commoner is overpowering the Durahan family's signature spinning style. One clean exchange forces Faye to retreat and stabilize herself with her spear, clearly frustrated as she demands to know what kind of technique Lewis is using. Lewis simply explains it's a martial method where he adjusts his movement to match and cancel out rotational force, but Faye just stares blankly, not understanding a single word. So Lewis shrugs and tells her to just think of it as that kind of technique before charging in again. Faye immediately responds with spear attacks, but Lewis slips through them effortlessly with light, unpredictable footwork. Kane, watching from the side, rubs his eyes in disbelief, saying Lewis moves like a butterfly drifting through attacks. Even Faye starts getting visibly nervous as Lewis keeps appearing right in front of her, but she still can't land a clean hit. In reality, Lewis is using a refined movement style inspired by a legendary boxer, the butterfly step, a rhythm-based footwork technique that makes his movement nearly impossible to track. With that rhythm, he finally closes the distance and lands a powerful strike that sends Faye flying backward. Kane is completely shocked, and even the principal looks surprised by the sudden shift in momentum. A professor mutters that very few can overpower Faye even without magic, and now they're seriously starting to consider Lewis a genius in close combat. But Faye refuses to stay down. She stands back up, stubbornly declaring that someone from the Durahan family cannot lose so easily. This time she drops her spear entirely and takes a barehanded stance, making Lewis wonder if she's switching to another martial style. Faye suddenly charges in again, forcing Lewis to counter with his own hand-to-hand techniques. But her crushing fist strikes are powerful enough to actually hurt him, something that surprises him for the first time. Lewis even compliments her technique mid-fight, while Faye proudly explains that the Durahan family is not limited to spear arts alone. She then unleashes the third form of crushing hand, increasing the pressure even more, and Lewis responds with boxing techniques, fully matching her intensity as the fight escalates into pure close-range combat. For Lewis, this is exactly what he's always wanted, a real battle against a strong opponent that pushes him to his limits. But suddenly, something changes. His heart starts pounding as a strange voice echoes inside his mind, urging him to keep fighting, pushing further and further. His eyes begin to glow red as his presence shifts completely, his rhythm and style turning sharper and more dangerous. Faye immediately senses something unnatural in him, and her body instinctively locks up from fear, unable to move for a moment. She still manages to block one attack, but the impact sends her flying through the air, crashing into the ground, bouncing back up, and slamming into a tree before finally dropping again. Nearby examinees watching the scene react with anger, unable to accept that a commoner is overwhelming Faye like this, while one of them named Brian suddenly turns pale, shaken by the overwhelming pressure in the air. At that moment, everyone finally realizes something terrifying is happening to Lewis. Sheath completely loses his cool after his plan to eliminate Lewis fails, his frustration boiling over as the situation slips out of his control. Meanwhile, Brian, now injured, panics and tells Sheath to kill Lewis no matter what, insisting they cannot afford to let him survive if even half the rumors about him are true. Back on the battlefield, Lewis suddenly dashes toward Faye again, but she is already heavily injured and barely able to move, leaving her no chance to dodge or counter as Lewis lands another clean hit that sends her flying once more. With his eyes still glowing red, Lewis presses the attack, and for the first time Faye clearly realizes the massive gap between them, understanding that if this continues, she might actually be killed. Desperate to survive, she forces herself to use a martial arcane technique, Blaze Fist, trying to meet his punch head-on, but Lewis completely overwhelms her power and sends her crashing through nearby trees. The impact shakes the ground as Lewis lands, cracking the terrain beneath him, but in the next moment his expression shifts back to normal as he snaps out of that strange state and notices his own injured fist, damaged from Faye's magic. Kane rushes in immediately, asking if he is alright, but Lewis is more concerned about Faye's condition instead. Before anything else can settle, Sheath appears and coldly declares that Lewis has been disqualified because his emblem has been burned, ordering him to leave the training ground immediately. Kane instantly steps in, insisting it was just an accident, but Sheath counters by saying the principal witnessed everything and accuses Kane of trying to help a commoner cheat. He then orders Lewis to leave at once, claiming he is disrupting the exam. The tension spikes again when Faye finally appears, visibly injured but still standing on her own, shocking even Lewis, who thought she might be worse off. Sheath immediately pressures her, asking if she is really willing to defend Lewis even if it costs her disqualification, but Faye shuts him down, saying she already knows her emblem is gone. She calmly walks over to Lewis and apologizes for accidentally using magic during their fight, surprising Kane, who didn't expect her to admit fault so easily. Lewis quickly responds, saying he was the one who lost control earlier, but Faye brushes it off and says it doesn't matter to her since he forced her to use her full power, meaning he technically wins. She even tells him they should have another match once they are both officially enrolled. She scoffs at that, laughing as he points out that Lewis only has 4 emblems left and is already disqualified anyway. But before anyone can react, Faye casually hands all of her emblems over to Lewis, saying it counts as a reward for beating her, instantly boosting his total to 14 emblems. She then turns to Sheath and states that since Lewis's emblem was burned because of her magic, it should still be counted as valid, leaving Sheath furious but completely unable to refute her claim as the situation turns against him. Faye suddenly turns to Kane and bluntly says she cannot accept weaklings passing while stronger people are being eliminated, then walks over to pick up her spear again while pointing out a key flaw in the system. Only 10 people can pass, so what happens if someone at 10th place ends up holding 14 emblems or more? Kane immediately understands her plan, realizing she's trying to secure Lewis a spot in the top 10, and surprisingly agrees with her, even teasing that she can think about things other than just fighting. With that settled, both of them immediately rush off again to continue collecting emblems as the chaos of the exam resumes. At the same time, one of the professors drops down to escort Lewis out of the training ground, confirming his disqualification. Sheath tries to calm himself, telling himself not to overthink the situation, but Brian coldly points out a dangerous possibility. If Faye keeps defeating other examinees and transferring emblems, Lewis might still end up passing. That thought instantly irritates Sheath, because he refuses to accept a commoner like Lewis standing on equal ground with nobles. And in that moment, a darker intention flashes through his mind as he considers making Lewis's elimination look like an accident during the exam. Brian, still watching closely, insists Sheath should take care of Lewis, while also hinting that he better not become like the weaklings who failed, revealing that he seems to know something deeper about Lewis's identity. Meanwhile, outside the 3rd training ground, Lewis calmly hands over all his collected emblems to the professor, accepting his disqualification for now. Even so, he reflects that while martial arts are powerful, they still cannot fully match magic on their own, and he starts thinking that if he can learn how to combine magic and martial arts in this academy, it would perfectly match the future he wants. Later that night, Lewis walks alone outside, still bothered by his torn clothes and worrying about how his foster mother will react, knowing she will definitely panic and start asking questions if he tells her the truth. Suddenly, a figure in black passes by him, and in the next instant that same person attempts to ambush him from behind, but Lewis reacts instantly and counters with a clean kick, stopping the attack cold. The attacker, surprised, asks how Lewis noticed him, but Lewis simply smirks and replies that the killing intent cannot be hidden. Before the situation can settle, two more assassins appear and surround him, making it clear this is a coordinated attack. Lewis immediately realizes these opponents are highly skilled and decides he cannot hold back anymore, also noticing that the most dangerous threat is the assassin hiding in the trees above. Moments later, a yellow-haired assassin strikes from the air while warning Lewis that if he even looks away for a second, his will be taken down. Lewis smoothly shifts into martial arts, weaving through the assassin's attacks with sharp precision before spotting an opening and grabbing one attacker's arm, slamming him hard into the ground. The yellow-haired assassin doesn't slow down and keeps pressing the assault, but every strike gets read and dodged, forcing him to retreat while realizing Lewis's close combat ability matches an apprentice-level fighter far more than expected. Even he admits it out loud, acknowledging that their intel was right about Lewis being dangerous in hand-to-hand combat. Seeing this, the assassin immediately changes tactics and orders the others to switch to magic support. Wind arrows start firing in rapid bursts, and Lewis barely avoids them while activating a breathing technique that circulates his internal energy, boosting his strength, speed, and reaction time to the limit. With his body enhanced, he breaks through the barrage, closing the distance in a flash, then leaps mid-air to grab one target and kicks the yellow-haired assassin cleanly, sending him flying. Despite the chaos, Lewis keeps evading multiple wind arrows at once while the yellow-haired leader commands his team to stop him immediately. Then suddenly, the hidden assassin finally reveals himself from the tree line and lands a heavy kick that shakes Lewis's arm, forcing him to instantly disengage and create distance, realizing this new opponent is on a completely different level. The masked fighter stands silently while the others regroup, surrounding Lewis again and bombarding him with coordinated wind magic. Even with perfect timing, the constant pressure starts wearing Lewis down, and after taking multiple hits, he finally drops to the ground, prompting the assassins to relax and assume he's finished, even commenting that they're exhausted just from fighting him. They start questioning if he's really just a commoner, since he's been more troublesome than most trained apprentices. But unknown to them, Lewis was only pretending to be down. The moment they step closer, he explodes into action, instantly taking down the nearest assassin, then using a stolen bow to eliminate the remaining attackers in one sharp sequence. The masked assassin blocks the counter-attack effortlessly, calmly acknowledging Lewis's clever tactics despite his age. Lewis points the bow at him and coldly asks if he doesn't care that all his subordinates are dead, but the masked assassin simply replies that trash has no value to him. Lewis charges again, but the masked man mirrors his movements and evades everything with ease. Then the assassin forms a massive hammer of energy in his hand, stating that if not for orders, he would have taken Lewis as a disciple. Lewis tries to block the strike, but the impact sends him flying through the air. In an instant, the assassin follows up with an even larger hammer attack, openly stating that Lewis might be above an apprentice level, but against a high-ranked fighter, he doesn't even compare. Lewis attempts to counter, but the difference in power becomes clear as he fails to stop it completely. Even after being slammed again, the assassin presses forward with relentless follow-ups, only to realize something unsettling. Lewis is still alive despite all that damage. Body broken, yet Lewis refuses to fall. The assassin raises his weapon once more, showing no mercy as he declares that even a goddess cannot save him now, unleashing his ultimate martial arcane technique, Celestial Hammer. At that moment, Lewis's resolve explodes as he remembers the people he wants to protect, the family he refuses to lose, and his determination to change his fate. His eyes flare red again as he steps into the attack and meets the hammer head-on with a desperate counter, refusing to die. The impact shocks even the assassin, who realizes his strike was actually neutralized. But Lewis collapses immediately after, barely breathing, lying on the ground in critical condition. The assassin lands and pauses, strangely unsettled, admitting it feels like he is fighting someone on equal footing, finally understanding why Lewis is being targeted and why his existence is so dangerous. Still, he raises his hand again, calling Lewis a monster as he prepares another finishing blow. The moment the assassin's finishing blow is about to land, another force suddenly intercepts it, and Lewis is saved at the last second by a surge of wind magic that pushes the attacker back. Before the assassin can recover, more wind-based attacks rain in from multiple angles, cornering him completely and forcing him to take the full impact without any chance to escape. Watching this unfold, even Lewis is stunned, wondering what kind of situation is this. Then the principal lands right beside him, making it clear that he was the one who intervened. He calmly expresses relief that Lewis managed to suppress the rampage, then immediately orders him to drink a healing potion. As Lewis recovers, the principal turns his attention to the captured assassin and demands to know who ordered him to target an academy examinee. The assassin instantly recognizes him as a grandmaster, but refuses to cooperate and coldly states that even the principal cannot protect Lewis forever. Without hesitation, he suddenly collapses, and before any answers can be obtained, warning that this is only the beginning before collapsing. The principal watches in silence, quietly questioning whether this is the work of the Assassin Guild, though he hopes he is simply overthinking it. Moments later, Lewis stands up after drinking the potion and is shocked by its effectiveness, not only healing external wounds, but even mending fractured bones. Realizing the principal didn't save him by coincidence, Lewis directly asks why he keeps helping him, and the principal simply replies that he will explain everything at his home. Those words immediately remind Lewis of the time, and panic hits him as he realizes his mother must be worried, so he rushes straight back home. The principal calmly calls out to someone named Kylie and orders them to handle the cleanup at the site. Meanwhile, back in the town of Mantia, a group of nobles has surrounded Lucilla, accusing her of misusing funds and blaming her for repairing a strange millstone. But their real intention is clearly to pressure her for their own motives, hiding their harassment behind false accusations. Lucilla tries to explain that she is just waiting for her son, but before things escalate further, Lewis arrives at the perfect moment and kicks one of the nobles straight in the face, sending him flying. Lucilla's relief quickly turns into shock when she sees Lewis covered in blood and his clothes completely torn, but Lewis calmly reassures her that he is fine and lies that he just got caught on a tree during the exam. The injured noble gets back up, even more furious, and threatens Lewis for interfering, warning him that he is picking a fight with a lord. They further threaten to report him to the town's lord, but the atmosphere instantly shifts when the principal arrives behind them. The nobles freeze in shock as they realize they are standing in front of a grand master, and their arrogance disappears in an instant as they hurriedly apologize. The principal simply tells them to send his regards to the lord, and the nobles immediately back off and leave in fear. After they are gone, the principal turns to Lucilla and says there is something they need to discuss. She politely invites him inside their home, where the principal notices the strange millstone still operating on its own without any magic. He also observes that several other objects in the house function in the same unusual way. The principal quietly takes a seat as Lucilla brings him some fruit, and she casually mentions that although she doesn't understand how any of it works, everything was created by Lewis, and thanks to him, their daily life has become much easier. Then, with concern in her voice, she asks if Lewis has caused any trouble during the exam now that the principal has personally come to visit. The principal lets out a calm laugh after hearing Lucilla's concern and confirms that Lewis has achieved results far beyond anything expected, even stating that he has only ever seen this level of talent recorded in the Gaia scripture. He then begins to tell a story from ancient times, when humanity was crushed under the tyranny of monsters, until a single genius appeared among them. Guided by the goddess, that individual awakened the essence of the elements and created martial arcane, a power that changed everything. 5 years later, alongside his companions, he led humanity to victory and wiped out the monsters, saving mankind from extinction, a moment later remembered as Liberation Day when the Saint calendar was born. In the Gaia scripture, that figure is called the first hero. Lucilla reacts with awe, calling the hero a true savior, but Lewis quietly points out that no such hero exists in common folk legends. The principal then drops another revelation, saying the hero is described as a man with black hair, black eyes, and dark features. That immediately shocks Lucilla, who instinctively pulls Lewis closer in fear, while the principal sighs and explains that this truth is known only to the highest ranks of humanity. He reveals that although the hero did save the world, something inside him broke, a madness that took root in his heart, leading him to commit an unforgivable sin, after which all records of him were erased from history, as if that curse-like instability could not be allowed to spread. Hearing this, Lewis quietly realizes how closely it mirrors the strange force he sometimes feels within himself. The principal then stands, explaining that because of this, every nation secretly eliminates individuals born with black hair and black eyes, considering them dangerous from the start, and he gently taps Lewis on the head, asking if he really thought he could fool everyone just by dyeing his hair. Lucilla immediately breaks down in tears, trying to take all the blame on herself while calling Lewis a good boy, but Lewis stops her and calmly says it is fine, because if the principal truly wanted him dead, he would not still be standing here, meaning there must be a reason he was allowed to live. The principal nods in approval, praising Lewis for his sharp judgment despite being only 13, and then goes further, saying that Lewis has not only resisted that inner madness, but has actually begun to control it, something even rare among legends. He declares that this is why he sees Lewis as a potential new hero. Lewis is left speechless as the principal continues, saying the world may look peaceful on the surface, but beneath it, a deep darkness is always stirring. And after witnessing Lewis today, he is starting to think even the old legends might not be so impossible after all, which is why he wants to guide him for the future of humanity. Then the principal casually tosses an apple, which Lewis catches instantly, and reveals that Lewis passed the final test thanks to both his own effort and Kane's involvement, officially granting him admission into the Candria Arcanist Academy and asking if he would accept his personal instruction. Lewis smirks and asks if the principal is betting on him, even knowing he might lose control one day. And in that instant, the principal's expression sharpens as he slices the apple midair with magic, declaring coldly that if Lewis ever does go berserk, he will personally be the one to kill him. The next day, Lewis's foster brother is overjoyed after hearing that Lewis received a personal invitation from Principal Aronian, treating it like the highest honor imaginable and immediately starting to talk about covering all expenses for him. Lewis calmly confirms it, but makes it clear that this is not the only reason he is leaving. While his brother keeps celebrating, Lewis quietly reflects that yesterday's events felt less like praise and more like a warning, and he starts questioning his connection to the legendary hero, wondering how much of the principal's words he can truly trust. His thoughts drift back to the night before, when after speaking with Lewis's mother, the principal escorted him outside and asked why he allowed her to hear everything. The principal explained that if she stayed ignorant, she would only become a burden, but Lewis immediately rejected the idea of her ever being a burden. However, the principal warned him that once Lewis's true identity is exposed, she could be in danger, so as a mother she needs at least some understanding of the situation, before finally taking off into the sky and telling Lewis to grow stronger because the real trials are only beginning. Returning to the present, Lewis accepts that those words were not wrong. At that moment, his younger sisters rush in after hearing he is leaving, and Lana tearfully asks if he will ever come back home. Lewis gently reassures her that he will return during long breaks because this is still his home, and Lana insists on a pinky promise so he cannot break it. Just then, Lewis is informed that Kane's butler has arrived calling for him, and he heads out to find that Kane has personally invited him to the Harzen Manor. Realizing Kane likely wants to build their connection before academy life begins, Lewis accepts and rides off in the carriage. Upon arriving in Harzen town, he is impressed by the massive estate, openly acknowledging the strength of Kane's noble family. Kane quickly runs out to greet him, excited that they will soon be classmates, and thanks him for helping during the final exam, while casually mentioning their earlier promise, which Lewis agrees to set aside. Kane, however, laughs it off, saying it is a separate matter since Lewis clearly earned his place. As they enter the mansion, Kane explains that he regrets not being able to spar with Lewis during the exam, so he intends to make up for it now before school starts, and also notes that Lewis likely wants more information about the academy. Lewis smiles, but the mood shifts when Kane's mother arrives after hearing the noise and immediately begins interrogating Kane about Lewis. Kane introduces Lewis as his friend, which only angers her further as she insults Lewis and calls their connection a waste of time, insisting Kane should focus solely on becoming a sage like his father. She then coldly accuses Lewis of chasing money and throws a gold ring at him, telling him to sell it and stay away from Kane. Kane immediately apologizes to Lewis, but Lewis quietly picks up the ring and responds calmly that he became Kane's friend because he recognized his potential, then questions whether she thinks Kane's words are worth something so cheap. Enraged, Kane's mother orders the guards to throw him out, but Kane steps in and stops them, defending Lewis by explaining his progress so far. She dismisses it as lies meant to elevate a commoner, but Lewis himself confirms it is true and boldly states that Kane will become even stronger if he stays by his side. That statement pushes her anger even further, but before she can act, a far heavier presence enters the room. Kane's father, William, a grandmaster. He immediately asks Lewis if he truly believes Kane will grow stronger because of him. Kane's mother instantly becomes nervous and tries to flatter William while claiming Kane will never surpass him if Lewis remains involved. But Kane greets his father and Lewis calmly introduces himself as Kane's friend. Lewis is struck by William's overwhelming aura, sensing it is on the same level as the principal. Ignoring the greetings, William focuses on Kane and demands to know if Lewis's statement is true. And under immense pressure, Kane nervously confirms that at the very least Lewis surpasses him. The moment those words are spoken, William releases a crushing wave of killing intent toward Lewis, forcing him to his limit as he realizes in shock that William is not testing him at all, but genuinely intends to kill him.